Hello, everyone. It is wonderful to see you joining our roundtable this morning. My name is Jennifer Adams, and I am the editor-in-chief with Signature Leadership by Knowledge Hook, and it is a thrill to be welcoming you here with us today. We have a great program. We're going to be looking at social emotional skills and a working paper by the OECD that has the latest evidence on teachability and impact on life outcomes. So welcome. We look forward to having a great conversation. Just to give you a little bit of a sense of where this comes from, we've got three partners that got together during the time of the pandemic and thought it was a really important time to find methodology that we could be going out and having these conversations on the importance of social emotional learning in our school systems and the impact of those social emotional skills on children and young adults. Our first partner is Signature Leadership by Knowledge Hook. Knowledge Hook is a digital math company out of Toronto, Canada. And we've been doing all sorts of interesting thought leadership for senior leaders, teachers, principals, policy people, and all of those on-demand versions are available for you to go in and take a look and download if you would like. Our second partner is Karanga, and Karanga is an organization that came together in 2018. Karanga is the Global Alliance for Social Emotional Learning and Life Skills, and it was really an attempt, it was a network of people that got together and decided that we really need to be looking at what was happening globally in the many education systems throughout the world. And we are happy to be here. My co-facilitator today, Dominic, Regester, both of us are on the executive committee. Our third partner is Salzburg Global Seminar, and Dominic is program director there for the education part of the work that they do. Again, an international nonprofit that began in 1947 with the mandate to challenge current and future leaders to shape a better world, and massive representation of people that have come through those programs from 180 countries worldwide. So those are the three partners that are bringing forward this webinar, and happy to have all of you here with us. And speaking of which, today we have registrants from 7 Canadian provinces and territories, from 19 states throughout the United States, and from 27 different countries. And so a conversation, we are always thrilled to see and hear the research that's coming out of the OECD. And it's my pleasure to just quickly, before I hand it over to Dominic, welcome the two panelists that we have here today. Noémie Donné, who is a senior project manager with CIRI and with the OECD, and Adriano Linzarini, who is the lead analyst for the working paper that we'll be talking about today, Rethinking Assessment of Social Emotional Skills, and thrilled to begin this conversation. So Dominic, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everybody. It's very good to be back in one of these SEL leadership series. And Noémie and Adriano, thank you so much for joining us today. The way we're going to structure the conversation is, in a minute, Noémie's going to introduce the research paper, and then Adriano is going to talk through some of the findings around the teachability component of the paper. We'll then pause for a bit of a discussion about that and take a couple of questions from the audience. Adriano will then move through the assessment part of the presentation, and then we'll take questions and open the discussion up. And so the presentation and first part of the discussion will be about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll have half an hour or thereabouts for a full discussion. We've had some amazing experiences with the OECD in this series over the last couple of years, so it's fantastic to welcome Noémie and Adriano here. It's both of your first times on the series, and we'll be putting links to some of the previous recordings related to some of the earlier OECD publications around social and emotional skills in the chat during our conversation today. But Noémie, let me hand over to you, and thank you again for being here.
Yes, thank you so much, Dominic, and thank you so much, Jennifer, for your invitation today, and also for your support. The last webinar you said was a couple of years ago, and we are happy to be back with a new team. I'm the head of the Social and Emotional Skills Unit at the OECD Directorate for Education. And as you know, the OECD has been a forerunner on the international scene for the topic of social and emotional skills. And can you move to the next slides? Thank you. As you know, one of our flagship projects is the OECD survey on social and emotional skills. This is the largest international system-level survey on such skills. It assesses the skills of 15 and 10-year-old students. But to inform the development of this project, we have now set up a little R&D unit. And Adriano is the lead analyst of this R&D unit. And recently, the team has reviewed evidence on the teachability of social and emotional skills, but also on their predictive value, so their impact on key life outcomes. And in parallel to this, we have also started to look into how we can innovate assessment of social and emotional skills by using direct assessments. On that slide, you have a refresher about the framework that we use at the OECD with the different domains that we assess and the different skills. And you can keep that in mind because we will refer to this as we move on in this presentation. And I will now hand over to Adriano, who will present the first working paper that the team has published on the teachability and impact on life outcomes of social emotional skills.
Thank you, Noémie. So we did a thorough literature review on the teachability and the impact on life outcomes, as Noémie said. And we published a first working paper on this topic. So we wanted to look at what does the research tell us, and we wanted to ask three main questions. The first one is, can social emotional skills be taught? The second is, how and why are social emotional skills important? And the third question is, what kind of evidence do we actually have? And all these questions are basically answered in this first working paper that you can find online quite easily. The first answer is that we find that meta-analysis and systematic reviews of interventions do demonstrate that these skills are teachable in school settings, across age groups and national contexts. And I specifically say teachable because a lot of evidence shows that these social emotional skills are malleable, so they change throughout life. But we wanted to make sure and compile the evidence that these skills are actually sensible to training and to specific targeted interventions. The second thing we see is that social emotional skills do show a positive but a differential impacts on various life outcomes, such as mental health, academic success, and job performance. So we looked at the evidence linking each of these skills to 4 types of life outcomes, and we'll discuss those later: academic, labor, quality of life, and societal outcomes. And we do conclude that social emotional skills show these positive impacts, but not all of them for the same outcomes. And I would like to go back to that again later. And the third question, the third important point of this paper is that we find that for some skills, the evidence and or the research is quite scarce. So social emotional skills do show, again, a strong evidence of impact with life, on life outcomes, but not all of them the same way. And in this publication, finally, we'll also find valuable text boxes showcasing effective school-based interventions. As an example of these results, here's a table taken from the publication. And here you can see several examples of skills and the amount of evidence we found of their teachability, the first line, and of evidence of their relationship to specific outcomes, measured as the number of high-quality articles we found that support each link from very high to low. And if we compare, for example, the first column, so self-control to empathy, which is the fourth skill we reviewed, we can see that while there is substantive evidence linking self-control to academic outcomes such as academic performance or academic attainment, it's not the case for empathy. But the opposite is true for societal outcomes such as civic engagement. So the key point that we try to make in this working paper is that, yes, social emotional skills are important, but not all of them the same way. So when developing social emotional learning interventions, it is fundamental to clearly define and select the skills we want to target based on the positive impact that this intervention is expected to have in children's life.
That's fantastic and really clear. Thank you very much. So what the study has shown so far is that all of the skills are teachable, but the degree to which they have an impact on different outcomes varies. Is that a correct summation?
No, actually, even for teachability, now we selected the skills where we found most evidence of the teachability, but not all the skills seems to be teachable the same way. And again, there's a clear distinction between malleability and teachability. So we see that some skills change throughout life, but it's not because they change because people grow up or people are confronted to a lot of different situation during their life, that specific interventions have a strong impact on those. So it's also important to question whether we're seeing changes because of a lot of different factors, or whether we're seeing changes because it's possible to train these skills specifically in a school or educational setting, for example.
And where there isn't the strong evidence of teachability at the moment, is that because there aren't enough studies out there, or is there evidence that certain skills are not teachable in the same way?
For most of the skills where we don't find that much teachability, it's mostly because research is lacking. And we see also, even for the relationship to key life outcomes, we don't say that when we don't find evidence, there is no link. We just say that we need more research in order to see whether this link exists or not. And we see that research tends to select some skills for some topics. So we have a lot of evidence on those, and we do lack a lot of evidence for other skills and relationship with certain outcomes.
I would like to add to this answer in two ways. One is that we decided to review the recent evidence on the teachability of social emotional skills and the impact of life outcomes. So we looked at evidence published in 2015 and after 2015. So there might be, previous research showing positive links, and we had working papers, published on previous evidence in the past. So you can refer to that too. And second of all, we can suspect that there might be publication bias. Sometimes it's easier to publish a paper that showed positive effect of social emotional learning intervention, of course. So we may be also focusing a lot on, those interventions that were effective. So we need to keep that in mind. But overall, it was quite reassuring to see that many interventions were found to be effective. And so for some of them, we found more than 10, studies showing that it was possible to boost, for instance, a skill set such as self-control through a deliberate intervention in schools.
You talked about publication bias, Noémie. Is there also a geographic factor within that? Like, are you seeing a greater concentration of studies from certain countries or certain parts of the world, and is there geographic variation in the extent to which the skills are teachable or have a life impact?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yes, of course, a lot of research is US centered and come from US interventions. But the good thing is that since the first working papers that were published by the OECD, so in the 2010s, and now our recent working paper, we were able to, extend the coverage, the geographical coverage of the research we reviewed. And so we were able to include studies conducted in Lebanon, for instance, but also in Latin America, in Europe, and so on. So there is still, I think, a strong emphasis on US and North America in general. But I think that's good to see in recent years that research has expanded in other, and also interventions have expanded in other areas of the world.
Dominic, a couple of questions coming in now from the chat, which is really exciting. First of all, I want to welcome Stephanie Jones to our webinar today. We are very fortunate to have her. For those in the audience that don't know Stephanie, she does amazing work out of the EASL lab in Harvard, and is certainly an expert in the area of social emotional learning. And one of the things, Stephanie, I'm wondering if you can post a link to, you have an amazing framework that talks very much about what Adriano was talking about, that some competencies have more of an impact on certain outcomes, whether they're life skills, etc. And I'm sure the audience would really appreciate that. So welcome, Stephanie, and please feel free to jump in and comment as you will. Another question that's coming in from Paula. And Paula asked, in your opinion, how would you recognize those skills to target during SES interventions? Is there an assessment tool to use or a data template? So I'll repeat the question. In your opinion, how would you recognize those skills to target during SES interventions? And is there an assessment tool to use or a data template? So we've got people that are thinking right at the classroom level, you know, how do you think about which ones to target and how to be able to gather that information?
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Paula, for the question. Yes, well, actually, the table that Adriano just showed was a table that is actually extremely useful for us because it already pre-selects the skills that are both highly teachable and also that have a high impact on life, you know, outcomes. So these are the skills we think should be prioritized for teaching, for assessments, because they can be taught and they are important. So, so that's the answer probably to that question. Then with regards to the second question, how to assess them, I think we'll get back to that later in this discussion, in this seminar. But basically, we at the OECD have developed a self-assessment of social emotional skills, and our assessment is available online. That's the assessment that was used in 2019. However, we have innovated and improved it for the data collection we conducted in 2023, and we still plan to innovate it and improve it further in the next data collection, thanks to the work that my dear R&D team is doing and Adriano being part of it. So we'll get back to your question, Paula.
And if I can complement Noémie's answer, I think that so there are some general guidelines in terms of basically what seems to be more related to certain outcomes, but it's important to realize that depending on the cultural context, you may want to train some skills more than others, because depending on, so the final idea is not to train a skill, the final idea is to develop and nurture the child development. So our point here is that not all skills seems to relate the same way to some outcomes. So I would say you have to look at what you would like to train depending on what are the outcomes you want to develop, to foster, to nurture in children. And if you have, I don't know, for example, children that are confronted to harsh living conditions, you may want to train more resilience or skills that will allow them to foster, so to develop, so to grow up in a very difficult environment, while in other environments you may want to develop other skills. So I would say the important thing when you develop a cell implementation is to think about the alignment between the final purpose of the cell intervention and then the skill you want to train to arrive to get there, in a sense, and then you will create the specific cell implementation, looking at training that specific skill.
I love the comments, Adriano, because it really gets into that idea of design that does backwards design, where you think of what's the intended outcome, and then you think very strategically about the skills that you would like to be helping children and young adults develop. And then what are the methodologies? And just a note from another prominent person in the SEL world, Catherine Millett, mentioned that to remember that these skills are not uniquely developed within the classroom. They're developed in out-of-school programs, summer school programs, after-school programs, and of course in the community. So great comments. We appreciate those comments. I'm going to hand it back to Dominic. I think we're going to jump into our next little piece.
Before we move on to the impact and the assessment, one final question on the teachability and whether, in the context of this study or other work that your wider team has been involved in, there is evidence as to whether these skills are best taught through specific subjects or whether they're better taught as standalone subjects in the curriculum. And then the obvious follow-up question of how do you manage time constraints and creating space in overcrowded curricula already. and what the early findings are around that kind of evidence, please.
Yeah, no, that's a very important question. Thank you for asking. The evidence we have reviewed, I think, focuses on interventions that really targeted social emotional skills, on children's well-being and so on. Most of the interventions we looked at, didn't necessarily include like the synergy between social emotional learning and academic learning, and this is where I think we should focus a lot of our attention now, because there is evidence that these skills can be developed through dedicated programs, but now we need to find this synergy between social emotional learning and academic learning. And this relates to one of the R&D activities that we are doing right now, is that we would like to design social and emotional learning toolkits. So focusing on given skills and looking at effective teaching resources to develop that skill in a synergetic manner with like the teaching of academic subjects. So, but we still need to do more work on this, because I think the evidence is still scarce, and we need to fill the gap and find the relevant teaching approaches to do that. There might be experts on the call. I'm thinking of, you mentioned Stephanie Jones, who may have also answers to contribute to that question. Perhaps she will have also made some progress in her own research, and she may be willing to share. But this is typically, I think, the question we should all address in the future: how to make sure we don't take away time from academic learning, and how to make sure we embed social emotional learning in traditional learning. And I mean, Stephanie's research is great for that, because she explains that we need to be very explicit about the skills that we are teaching. When we teach like a math course or a reading course or reading lesson, we need to be very explicit that there might be challenges on the way, so we will develop the skill of perseverance. We'll also develop the skill of curiosity and so on. And so we'll create these opportunities as we teach a regular, subject lesson. So, but yes, more to come, I think, on this, and I hope we'll be able to share these toolkits publicly in a few months from now and in the coming years as well.
And thank you. If I could ask one final question, your last comment prompted on that is around the importance of intentionality in the teachability. So, being able to say, today we are going to be working on empathy through studying, historical diaries or something like that, or we're going to be working on collaborative problem solving through these activities. And is there any evidence around, a correlation between having very clear intentionality, so the students know that they're doing both the academic subject and developing the social emotional skill?
So along the let's say best emerging practice, so emerging best practices in the field, and again, as Noémie said, it's a quite young field at the moment. It seems clear that the tools that work best are tools that do target specific skills. So very broad tools that don't define specifically the skills and don't define exactly how the skills should be trained seems to work less well. And I think one of the elements is definitely intentionality. And I'm a cognitive scientist, so there's a fundamental aspect of anything we do in cognition, it's motivation. And we know that motivation is not even a skill, it's a state of the brain and the general brain systems. And we know that motivation can heighten or lower any kind of teaching and learning and memory. So it has an impact on everything we do, especially like any change we want to produce at the brain and the system level. So it's certain that intentionality is fundamental, and also because it develops introspective abilities. And some of these skills are highly related to the ability to understand how, so for the child to understand how they work and how they think. And these abilities then will have certainly a positive impact on all the development of all the other social emotional skills.
Yes,
thank
and
you very much.
in the
Sorry,
working
Noémie.
paper, just to complement, in the working paper, we also list common features of effective programs. There is no, clear evidence that each feature is effective, but these are all the features that were, common to the effective program. So there is this assumption that this is why these programs are effective. And so you can refer to the working paper for more details.
Do you have a link to the working paper to hand that you could, because many people are asking in the chat if we have it available?
Yes.
Or we can find it while we go through the next part of the presentation. So let me hand back to you for to sort of see us through to the end of the presentation, and then we'll come back with the discussion around assessment.
So we said that social emotional skills are teachable and that social emotional skills are extremely important. And now I would like to make the point that assessing these skills is absolutely important too. Why? Because we need robust, valid, and comparable assessments in order to monitor social emotional development and to improve teaching practices and SEL interventions, social emotional learning interventions. The need for assessment is very real. It has to become a priority to tackle, as confirmed by a recent OECD publication work on philanthropy for SEL. And in a survey of over 30 organizations around the world implementing SEL programs, the main barriers to implementations were identified as one, rigid education policy and curriculum mandates, and two, a lack of adequate evaluation tools. So the report concludes that there's a lack of clear guidance or consensus on how SEL programs should be assessed and evaluated. And this really taps very well into the first questions we had from the chat, actually. So in this context, a second part of our work relates to the review of the existing measurement tools assessing social emotional skills. And the second working paper is coming out of this, out on this next month. So self-reports and teacher report questionnaires are currently the most used method to assessing these skills. They are indirect measurements because they require the learner to reflect on its own skill or behaviors. On the contrary, direct assessments refer to any method of collecting data that do require the students to demonstrate a knowledge, a skill, or a behavior. And we focus on those. We identify two in the paper. We identified after a thorough literature search a lot of different tools, and we created two large categories where we presented them for practical reasons. So the first large category is behavioral assessments, and behavioral assessments are game-based, task-based, judgment of social scenario tools that look at the reaction and the choices of the subject. The second category of approaches we looked at, we call them new technological approaches, and they encompasses biophysiological measures such as heart rate activity or cortisol levels in saliva, virtual reality tools and augmented reality tools. We also looked at artificial intelligence tools, so tools that, for example, are trained to recognize emotions in expressions or in text. And we also looked at digital footprints tools, so tools that use online data and try to extract information and infer skills based on this online data. And we reviewed almost 60 tools. We compared and analyzed each of these assessments based on a series of criteria, from their reliability, validity, to their adaptability across cultures. We published, so with this working paper, you will also find a very large online table available with all these tools and the criteria we used to compare them. So we also reviewed the strengths and challenges of new technological approaches, and some of them are very promising, but at the same time, at the moment, we conclude that there are a lot of ethical issues. So it's still a very young field now that we should look at, but be cautious about also. And we also end up by having these comparisons of different approaches and technologies and see at the moment what we think is the most promising.
So you may wonder how this will inform, the development, the future development of the OECD survey on social emotional skills. Well, we'll use this research to innovate the assessments. That is a key component of the survey, because we assess the skills of 15 and 10-year-olds. And so within the survey in 2026, so the next data collection, we will continue to use the well-established self-assessment of student social emotional skills, but we will also include innovative direct assessment of these skills. So currently we are thinking of including situational judgment items for at least 1 or 2 skills, and also task-based assessments of skills. A skill such as self-control, for instance, is a skill that can be easily assessed through a task. And we hope actually to be able to compare levels of skills of students across countries. This is something we have refrained from doing in the first rounds of the survey because we didn't think we had, enough assurance that what we were measuring could be directly compared across countries in terms of the levels of the skills in students. But with this innovative approach, we think that what we could do is to determine a minimum level of proficiency and compare the share of students that have reached this level of proficiency that they need to succeed in life, and we could compare across countries. So we really hope that we'll have more robust, more valid, more comparable measures thanks to these innovations. And then I can't, yes, thank you. I cannot leave you without announcing the global launch of the next, of the Survey on Social Emotional Skills 2023. We'll have a global launch in Sofia, but you can join us online. There will be a presentation of the findings by Andreas Schleicher. It's at the end of this week, this upcoming Friday, and then we'll have discussions by foundations and the business sector, and also discussions about the findings with high-level policymakers and experts. We'll have the pleasure to have a special session with the First Lady of Ukraine, but also several education ministers attending and experts from around the globe, including Stephanie Jones, who is on the call today. So thank you. You have the link to register to the launch. Please join us. It's going to be very exciting to discover and reveal the findings of the survey, and we would be very pleased to have you join. So this being said, we can go back to the topic of assessment of social emotional skills. Thank you.
And just to close, I would like to thank the whole team, and particularly Daniel Caterina da Silva, who helped me write the last working paper on the assessments. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And thank you for the link to Friday's event, which looks very exciting.
Yeah, and Jennifer is also participating in the national launch that China is organizing. So there are quite a few, experts, high-level experts involved around the table today. So thank you so much for your contribution.
I think it's really exciting. And, one of the topics, Dominic, you asked the question earlier on, is there certain parts of the globe that we're hearing from more? And what's been really exciting about the OECD survey on social emotional skills, that first, major international look at how children and young adults are developing those skills, it gave us an opportunity to really look at countries around the world. And when we think of that first cycle, we had participation from Finland, from China, from Korea, from, all sorts to Colombia. Lots of countries around the world, I think a total of 10 and even more this time. So what I'm excited about going to Shanghai next week and helping them with their launch is that we hear the stories on the ground of how different countries, different cultures are trying to get at helping children develop those skills. And Adriano, you talked very clearly in one of your responses saying context matters. And I think that's really helpful for everyone on the webinar today to hear those kinds of comments. So thank you.
if I can jump on that, I mean, based on the review we did for the second working paper, we realized that there's a lot of work that's been done to innovate on these assessments, to look at direct measurements. And it's pretty impressive because, again, we have like a lot of different approaches and it's very promising, but at the same time, at the moment, the world community still lacks very clear directions. So we have a lot of different initiatives, but these tools are often very specific, or they lack an international testing. So we don't know whether these skills can be tested the same way or in similar ways across countries, or whether some tools that have been validated specifically in certain contexts can be easily translated to others. So there's a lot of people doing a lot of stuff, but now what we should really start to do is try to find ways to pull everything together and start finding like ways to let's say, talk the same language and being able to transfer these tools in order to understand whether, for example, international organizations who implement SEL in some countries, they should be able to measure the efficacy of those implementations across regions, across cultures, across countries, using similar tools, because otherwise we don't know what works. It's very simple.
Are you seeing system-wide assessment approaches emerging? So either sort of moving towards the high stakes kind of testing and assessment that create a different kind of, I suppose, value or currency for the qualification, or system-wide, but not yet at the high stakes level?
You want to
No, great.
The question of the high stake level, it's so so high stakes means that basically the assessment will have a direct impact on the future of education, the education of the child. And these are two different questions for me, I think. So on one end, basically you can't translate any tool that has not been developed for high stake assessments into a high stake assessment tool. It's very important to remind everyone that if we create an assessment to assess an individual, it's going to be a different approach than if we create an assessment to assess a system like we do at the OECD, or if we create an assessment having in mind to test individuals for high stakes ends. So it's very important that we cannot translate any tool and any assessment in any way, but we need to remember that every tool is developed with a specific ID in mind. So it has to be very clear that this assessment has been tested to assess, I don't know, psychological difficulties at school, for example, or this assessment has been tested to compare different countries, as Noémie said, and this is what we're doing at the OECD. And I think you have two approaches, so both a bottom-up and a top-down approach, where we need, on one end, we do need international assessment or large-scale assessment. And on the other, we do need individual assessment that can be used by teachers, by educators in the school, in the class setting, in order to have information about how each student is working. But these two tools are not the same. And you cannot take one tool and apply it in the other, because you will have biases. And the biases are very different if you're looking at a country or if you're looking at a specific class.
Yeah, but to complement on this, another team at the OECD has worked on different models for assessing social emotional skills in the context of upper secondary certification. And I'll share the link to the working paper in the chat. And basically what they found is that for this high stakes exam or for certification purposes, they usually rely a lot on implicit assessments, usually based on activities that students complete outside the classroom. So it could be extracurricular activities, or also, internships that students carry out with companies and so on. So you will have all this information in the working paper. They looked at 12 or 14 different jurisdictions. And so they focused on OECD member countries, so developed countries. So I'll post that in the chat. So yes, there are emerging tools, but usually not using objective, direct assessments as the one we propose for system level monitoring at the OECD.
We have a couple of questions and comments coming in now from the chat. And so Stephanie, once again, has said, so glad to see this work on SEL assessment. One of the challenges we've seen with some existing assessments is that they aren't often closely linked to observed behavior in real world situations under real world constraints. Will you have any opportunity to examine your assessments against ecologically relevant observations of behavior, even with a subsample or some subsamples?
Well, that is, of course, the ideal setting. And I think at least during the first stage of development, ideally, any of these tools should look at what we call criterion validity and other kinds of convergent validity, for example, where basically we check that what we're actually assessing is related to real life outcomes or real life behaviors in that sense. So we look at the moment, we have different for the self-report, we have different variables related to life, quality of life, or socioeconomic background, academic achievement. But the idea, if we go towards more behavioral assessment, is indeed, at least in the first steps, to check whether these behavioral assessments do strongly correlate with behaviors in real life.
One more question coming in. Can you talk about more, this is from Myra Stephen, can you talk about more about some of the ethical issues that require caution? And this is a great question. So, we know that it's challenging to assess academic skills, literacy and numeracy, and we know that there's a difference between what happens in those large scale assessments and what should be happening in the classroom. And I love how Annie Kidder and I made the comment at the same time, is this idea it's really important that you're helping to emphasize that those things are very different. What about the social emotional skills, and what are some of the ethical issues that could happen if we do this wrong?
It's a very difficult question, and of course, when we talk about social emotional skills, the first thing we think about is something that's very deep, that's very not deep, but very I like the word in English. That relates to the self a lot, and a lot of these skills have been measured through personality traits or in conjunction with personality traits. So what we did at the OECD, actually the model we're using at the OECD started based on a personality trait model, and we wanted to distinguish very clearly between personality and skills, and that's why now we're reviewing the self-report, and we're looking at tools that define these skills based on capability. So what a person can do, and not what a person have the tendency to do. So this is the first ethical concern, is that we're not going to assess an ability, we're going to assess a general behavior or a tendency to do something every day, which is not the same, because I can be introvert, but I can also have the ability to speak out loud in public if I need to. The second biggest, I would say, ethical concern is, of course, biases. And we know these biases exist in mathematics, in every kind of assessment we have in school. And these biases are probably even stronger when you touch social emotional skills, because these skills are developed and are used in social context. So the social context will have a major impact. And if we talk about social context, we talk about socioeconomic background, we talk about cultural context. So we know that these skills are strongly influenced, and also they're implemented in completely different contexts. So this is the major, at the moment, I think, challenge we're facing, is how can we assess these skills while being neutral, or as neutral as possible, but at the same time take into consideration cultural differences.
Yeah. And I would say, that's one of the OECD strengths, is to establish international expert groups and to work closely with participating countries, with their teams, to make sure that the assessment has the same, meaning in every cultural context, or as close as possible of the same meaning across cultures. And so we have like a long tradition of adapting all our assessments, our surveys to different contexts, and so this is where our expertise lies. And so this is how we will also proceed with the innovation we want to bring to the assessment, because obviously when you bring like direct assessments, you need to understand what is the right behavior, what is the socially, emotionally appropriate behavior to have to respond to a situation, and this can vary across cultures. So we will need to adapt that very carefully and have, scoring rubrics, as we call them, very clear definition of the skills, very clear definitions of the proficiency levels, and that we adapt across cultures. So, but yes, absolutely, this is clearly a challenge ahead of us, and thanks for mentioning it.
No, I mean, I think you just answered the question. Actually, Mary Beth was asking, is this going to be criterion referencing or will it be norm referencing? And it sounds like if you're doing a scoring rubric that you're actually doing more of a criterion referencing. Is that the way that this will go forward?
I think so. I will need to make sure I understand exactly the differences, the conceptual differences you are thinking of when bringing that distinction between, criterion or versus normal referencing. But yes, that's the idea, and I think it can be adapted. The scoring system will have to be adapted in a way across the different cultures. One thing that we noticed also in the previous round of the survey, and that you will see will be partly confirmed at the launch at the end of this week, is that education systems don't value all the skills in the same way. For instance, in the first round of the survey, we found that curiosity was strongly related to academic achievements, academic grades in all countries, but the relationship was stronger in the US, in Canada, in European countries. And it was weaker in Suzhou in China and in Daegu in Korea. So it seems to me that curiosity, as the way we have defined it in the first round, was more valued in Western cultures than in Asian cultures. And perhaps, it's also for us to reflect on how we should define it, how we should measure it in Asian cultures, because it was going too close to something that is similar to, being irrespective of, of others, or being, too curious, being a bit impolite. So that's the, we need to navigate this very carefully. And so these are very important lessons for us to, help us design better the assessments in the future. So yes, so just to follow up on this.
In the first survey then, from memory, correct me if I'm wrong, there wasn't comparison between the different cities. Also, there was comparison between the two age groups, and there was comparison across gender lines, wasn't there? But it wasn't. And but you said earlier, Noémie, that one of the directions of travel for the OECD research around this is to be able to do comparison between country systems.
Yes, absolutely. And we think we may be able to do that if we use direct assessments, because we self-report, or we have, just to say first that we have used very strict criteria. We have done thorough psychometric analysis, and we concluded that we cannot compare the means, across the different skills levels, across countries. But that we can compare the strengths and the direction of relationships. We can also compare differences between groups, so age groups, gender, across cultures. And this, we are using the same approach for the second round. But for the third round, we want to draw the lessons from the first two rounds and also rely on the recent findings from this R&D work and improve so that we can reduce the potential bias we found in the data and address that so that we can compare across systems. Of course, I think it would be, we would need to be careful, because the idea is not to do a ranking of countries. We are not PISA. We really want to be extremely careful about that. We don't want to make it like a competition across countries to know, who are the students who are the most curious in the world. That's not really of interest to us. We really want to be able to say, perhaps this is an area where your country should improve because we are seeing this and this. But it's not like, that we want to reproduce the PISA model for social and emotional skills.
Does PISA have an impact on your research and data? So when the PISA results came out at the end of last year, if countries see a particular direction of travel, does that impact on policymaker, or the political will towards embracing or adopting social and emotional skills programs?
Yes, well, PISA decided to include a few items from the survey on social and emotional skills. So the latest PISA edition includes some items. It's a very small portion of items that they use. So it's really not as comprehensive as the survey on social and emotional skills. But clearly it shows that, and you can look into the results, they found that, skills such as perseverance, curiosity are related to math performance at PISA. So this is interesting. But the difference is that we have like a much more comprehensive assessment. And also we are relating the social emotional skills to students' school grades. So we are actually relating social emotional skills to high stake assessments. And you will see if you compare when you see the results, because we also discuss the difference with PISA in the report, that there are differences. I don't want to disclose the findings, but I invite you to take a look. And in terms of the impact, yes, I think more and more countries are recognizing the importance of social emotional skills. I think it was a good message to convey, to send that PISA is also including this topic, but at the same time, it gets very diluted in PISA, because the focus is so much on literacy and numeracy, then you probably remember the key findings on these topics, but not on social emotional skills. So we think at the OECD, it's very important to keep the survey on social emotional skills, to keep the topic at the top of the global agenda. So this is why for now, although there has been a bit of, contagion effect, we are trying to keep the two surveys independent and separate to preserve the theme of social skills. Yes.
There's a great question from Annie Kidder in the chat that's just come through. Coming back to the earlier part of the conversation about rankings and international comparison, and just what strategies are you able to put in place to prevent SES assessments being used for ranking?
Yeah, well, as we said, perhaps if we put the focus on, the share of students that haven't reached the necessarily minimum level to be able to, thrive in life, be successful in their life, and, draw the attention to this, like you have that many students that you really need to care about and you really need to support. And of course you can compare across countries, but then it won't be like, like the top performers are, this country or this country. You need to accompany the message so that it's useful to the students who need it the most. And not like, so that, policymakers can be proud that, they rank first or second in the ranking. So something like this. But again, we will need to think this through. I agree. It's difficult.
And Noémie, maybe it gets back to, how this whole working paper started about the teachability of the skills. And maybe that's where, to try to put the focus on if a country is having students that are needing more support in developing a particular competency, then what are how is it teachable? What are the programs? What are the components of programs that will really support countries as they turn to get very strategic? It's not about teaching all skills. It's really about thinking about their population based on the assessment and based on what they know about their country and the children and youth in it, and what are the particular skills that they want to be teaching. And more importantly, what's coming out of this research that says, if you're trying to teach this competency or this skill, here are some program elements that you may want to be thinking about, and learning from countries where they seem to be having children that are performing well in a particular competency. How do we learn from those countries as opposed to how do we make it into ranking?
Yeah, it's exactly true. And to complement also your point, it's also like having a general overview of what works and not what works, but the correlation also of these skills on specific outcomes will let us to understand better, for example, whether different countries value different skills differently in the employability market, for example, or in schools. But then it will also allow the countries to identify basically what works based on, as you said, the others' experience and the other countries' experience, in order to target, again, because the final purpose is not to develop these skills specifically, it's to have an impact on children's lives.
Dominic, I'm very conscious of the time. I can't believe that an hour has gone by. I'm going to give a last moment, comment to you, and then I'll just make a quick one before we close.
Only to thank Noémie and Adriano for the fantastic presentation and answering such a breadth of questions. The event on Friday sounds incredibly important and really interesting, and we very much look forward to having you both back in a future iteration of the SEL Leadership Series, hopefully in the next month or two, where we can talk about the global survey and dive into more of these questions. So thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
Noémie and Adriano, and I do have great news for the participants that are on, and of course those that are in different time zones and are receiving this on demand. We will be having another Signature Leadership SEL Global Leadership Series event on May the 16th, and the OECD will be back with us again to continue this conversation. Thank you so much, and we look forward to all of you on May the 16th. Take care and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for having us.